The Lord be with you. A reading from the Gospel of Thomas. Jesus says, "The Pharisees and the scholars have taken the keys of knowledge and hidden them. They themselves have not entered, nor have they allowed to enter those who wish to. You, however, you must be wise as serpents and innocent as doves." Jesus says, "A grapevine has been planted apart from the Father. Since it is not strong, it will be pulled up by its root and it will perish." Jesus says, "Those who have something in hand will be given more, and those who have nothing will be deprived even of the little they do have." Jesus says, "Become passers-by." His disciples said to him, "Who are you to say these things to us?" He said to them, "You don't understand who I am from what I say to you. Rather, you have become like the Judeans, for they love the tree but hate its fruit, or they love the fruit but hate the tree." Jesus says, "Whoever blasphemes against the Father will be forgiven, and whoever blasphemes against the Son will be forgiven. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will not be forgiven, either on earth or in heaven." Jesus says, "Grapes are not harvested from thorn trees, nor are figs gathered from thistles, for they yield no fruit. Good persons produce good fruit from what they have stored up. Bad persons produce evil from the wickedness they have stored up in their hearts. And they say evil things, for from the overflow of the heart they produce evil." Jesus says, "From Adam to John the Baptist, among those born of women, no one is so much greater than John the Baptist that his eyes should not be averted. But I have said that whoever among you becomes a child will recognize the Father's kingdom and become greater than John." Words inspired by God. You warm enough, Al? Good. Good. You're a good boy. In 1979, a very, very famous longitudinal study was begun at the University of Minnesota. And it was the study of what happens to identical twins who are separated at birth. And they followed these people through. And as you can imagine, some extraordinary information came out of the study. One of the cases I just mentioned is called the case of the Jim twins. So here were two boys who were separated, identical twins, separated at age 4 weeks, and both adopted out to different parents who had no contact with each other subsequently. And these had no contact, had never met again for 39 years. And then they were identified and they were brought together as part of the study. And some amazing coincidences were unearthed. The first thing was that they were both independently named Jim by their adoptive families. They both had childhood dogs, pets, whom they both named independently of each other, Toy. How many dogs do you know called Toy? They both named their dogs Toy. Both of them married a woman called Linda. Not the same woman, different woman called Linda. They both got divorced. They both got remarried, and they both married second wives whose names were Betty. They both had sons, and they both called their son James Allen. They spelt it slightly different. One spelled it A-L-L-E-N, and the other spelled it A-L-A-N. But they were both James Allen. They were both 6 feet tall, 180 pounds. They both became firemen, and then they both became sheriffs. They both drove blue pickups, and they both took their families independently to a little seaside resort in Florida for vacation, never knowing each other. They both smoked Salem cigarettes, and they both drank Miller Lite beer. They both bit their nails. they suffered from migraines, and they both died of the same disease on the same day. I don't know what it is. It wasn't in the article I read. I have no idea what they died of. But they died on the very same day of the same disease. So I want to talk a little bit about this today, about information flow, how this kind of information gets transferred. Because as Ron said, all three readings today talk about wisdom and knowledge and information. And so I'm going to make 5 main points this morning. The first one, I will talk about fetal development, the development of the fetus. Secondly, I'm going to establish some definitions to create my argument. Then I'm going to talk about wisdom. Fourthly, I'm going to talk about from postulates to prejudices. And then fifthly, I'll say, I believe, you believe. So they're the 5 points I'll make this morning. So just to establish the kind of the biology of the situation right now. So when a sperm meets an egg, there's a single cell created. It's called a zygote. And this zygote implants itself in the womb. And it creates a placenta, which is the interface between the mother and the baby. And then it surrounds itself with 2 different kinds of membranes. One is called the chorionic sac, and inside that is another one called the amniotic sac. And the little embryo develops inside those 2 sacs, one within the other. And it establishes a connection to the placenta through the umbilical cord. So that's how a baby will go full term in the womb. If you have fraternal twins, and so 2 eggs are fertilized by 2 different sperms, and they both develop in womb, they will both create individual placenta. They're both attached to the womb in different places. They have their individual chorionic sacs, and they have their individual amniotic sacs, and within each one, they have their own umbilical cord. So they're literally like children born years apart. They're no different from kids born a year apart. These are fraternal twins. But in the case of identical twins, it changes a little bit. So identical twins is when there's a single egg fertilized by a single sperm, but at some stage it separates into 2 embryos. And depending when it separates, extraordinary differences begin to occur. So if they separate in the first 4 days, then they just develop like other kids or fraternal twins. So each of them will have its own placenta, each of them will have its own chorionic sac, each of them will have its own amniotic sac if they split in the first 4 days. But if they split between day 5 to day 8, then there's only one placenta being shared between the 2 of them, and there's only one chorionic sac being shared between the 2 of them. But they have the individual amniotic sacs within that chorionic sac. However, if the separation takes place between day 9 to day 12, then you have only one placenta, you have only one chorionic sac, and you have only one amniotic sac. And if they don't separate before day 12, then you have Siamese twins. They will never separate. They'll be conjoined for the entirety of the pregnancy. But the interesting thing is about this, a professor of psychology and medical genetics at the University of Indiana in Bloomington, who studied 7,000 pairs of twins, he came to the conclusion that the telepathic connection between twins, which is very highly researched, is dependent upon when the separation takes place. So the longer the twins have been together in the womb before they separate out, the more telepathic connection exists between them. Now obviously, if they don't separate out by day 12, they're going to be Siamese twins. But as he studied them, those who had been conjoined for 9 or 10 days had much more telepathic abilities with their twin than those who were separated, say, in the first 3 or 4 days. So that's my first point. That's what the biology of it looks like. And so how does that bear then on information theory or on wisdom or knowledge or pieces like this? So before I get into my thesis then, the second point I want to make is I want to define some of the terms I'm using. Because how we define terms establishes the arguments we can make, but also how we define terms, it determines the mindset and the reality that we can experience. How we define our terminology differentiates among worldviews, how we can perceive reality. And so here are my definitions. When I talk about a factoid, I mean, we're talking about information or knowledge that's available only at the physical level, the level of the physical universe or the physical world. So a factoid is, in some senses, it's knowledge gleaned from the physical world. It's important, but it's not the most important kind of thing. In general, knowledge is information that comes from outside the system into the system. So knowledge is stuff you acquire which you didn't previously know. So you read a book on geography and you find out, where Angola is. So that's information perhaps you didn't have and now you have it. So this is knowledge that comes from the outside and that comes inside. So that's more knowledge. Wisdom goes in the opposite direction, it seems to me. Wisdom is information that comes from the inside and goes out. And this is the true meaning of the word education in Latin. In Latin, educare literally means from out, means to lead out from inside. And this was Plato's knowledge. This was Plato's theory as well. That true wisdom is that which comes from the inside out because it's always been there. And so true education is the ability to encourage kids to reveal what they already know about life. So that's very, very different from knowledge, which goes in the opposite direction. My definition of truth is this. For me, truth is not just the one-to-one mapping between that which we observe and our particular models. It's not that. For me, truth, something is true if it transforms me and aligns me with source. That for me is the more important definition of truth. If something is transformative and aligns me with God or with source, it is true. And ultimate truth is that which transforms me radically and aligns me permanently with source. So that's how I would define truth. Then reality. For me, reality is not just what we take to be in the physical realm. Something is real if it can be sensed, if it can be thought about, if it can be remembered, or if it can be imagined. There are just different levels of reality. And to pretend that the only level of reality is stuff which is physically sensible, that's to impoverish our notion of reality. And I define imagination in this way. Imagination is not the faculty that allows us to make up stuff that doesn't really exist. Imagination is the ability to download knowledge or wisdom or information from other levels or other dimensions of reality into this particular physical level of reality. And we're doing this, as I talked at length last Sunday, about the different models of body and the different levels of body, all the ways from the physical body to the energy body, to the astral body, to the mental body, to the causal body, to Atman, and to Brahma consciousness. So we're drawing wisdom from all these levels of body. So as I present my thesis, I want you to hold those definitions in mind. So my next point then is, I'm going to talk about wisdom then itself. What does wisdom really mean? The difference between wisdom and knowledge. How do we go about these? So I want you to imagine a scene at Christmas. You're in a neighborhood and there's a house with Christmas lights and there's a row of Christmas lights right along the roof. The entire length of the roof has Christmas lights and they're flashing. And from where you stand, it looks like the light is running across the roof. It starts over here and it runs to the end of the roof and then it stops and goes back and it runs across the roof again. And of course it's not moving at all. The light is not moving at all. What's happening is there's maybe 100 bulbs strung along the top of the roof. The first one comes on and goes off very quickly. The second one comes on and goes off very quickly. The third one comes on and goes off very quickly. And they're happening so fast that to the naked eye it looks like the light is running along the roof. It's not running at all. It's just coming in and out of reality in different physical locations. And they're separated by a tiny distance and they're separated by a tiny splink of time, so it looks like the light is running along the roof. I believe that's what we're dealing with when we're dealing with information. The information for me is not the exchange of data bits from one location to another location. Rather, we're embedded in a field of information. This is the field of wisdom, or the field of consciousness. All of the information is there, just like the electricity is available in all of those light bulbs. So it's not like the light is jumping from point A to point B to point C to point D. It's that the electricity is there and it's been activated or deactivated. It comes on or it comes off. Knowledge, it seems to me, wisdom is the same thing. That we're embedded in an information matrix and it's available to everybody. If we know how to access the electricity, it comes on spontaneously. So wisdom is the ability to be clued into and to be able to utilize the information field in which every single one of us is embedded. And this then seems to me, this for me explains telepathy. Telepathy is not about thought transfer. It's not about me having an idea and shifting it over to you so you subsequently have the same idea. It's that both of us are, since we're plugged into the field, we both become aware at the same time of the information that's available right there. So there's a famous conundrum in physics called entanglement, which is the notion that when two electrons are forced away from each other at huge speeds, they all have their individual spin, their opposite spins. If one of them changes, the other instantaneously changes. And you can't explain it by the speed of light. Information cannot go between the two of them faster than the speed of light. But they're changing faster than that. So how is this possible? One possibility is that we think that we live in a four-dimensional world, 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. String theory says there are at least 6 other dimensions. And so while the 2 electrons are separated by the 4 dimensions we normally meet, there are others of those dimensions, some of those other 6, at which they're still connected. So somehow there's a connection maintained between the two of them. And I think the same thing happens with telepathy. We're all plugged into the same system. But as I said last Sunday, we tend to identify ourselves from the mental body down. We think we are just our mental body, our emotional life, our energy systems, and our gross body. And the side effect of these 4 bodies is that we believe in separate identity. But when we get up to the level of causal body, and up to the level of Atman, and up to the level of Brahman, we are conjoined, we're totally one. And so telepathy is not the exchange of information between point A and point B, it's the realization that we're embedded in a field of information. And so in the physical realm, nothing, it seems, can travel faster than light. But that's only in the physical realm. At other realms, that's not true. If I say to you, I want you just now, think of the sun. How long did it take you to think of the sun? Less than 1/10 of a second. Now the sun is 93 million miles away. And so it takes light 8 minutes to get from the sun to the earth. But you did it in 1/10 of a second. So your thought is 4,800 times faster than light. So thought travels much faster than light because it's in a different dimension completely. So light is not the ultimate speed. And indeed, thought is not the ultimate speed. If thought can travel that fast, wisdom can travel even faster. Wisdom is a much higher level completely. So wisdom is traveling faster than thought itself. Because wisdom for me is simply, how would I put it? It's like the source code is leaking into the other dimensions. The total source code from God is leaking into the other dimensions via wisdom. So wisdom is instantaneously available right throughout the system the whole time. So as long as we're operating out of models which are predicated upon separate identity, we're going to be bound by the laws of physics and bound by the laws of the physical world. When we step outside that, we're liberated and we have a totally different kind of a connection between us. That's my 3rd point. My 4th point, then, I talk going from postulates to prejudices. When you think about how we construct our models, our philosophies of life, our theories of what is, what we tend to do is we start off with a bunch of postulates. And these are unprovable. We have to accept them on faith. And I don't care what discipline you're involved in, the most elegant scientific discipline of all is pure mathematics. But even pure mathematics is founded on axioms. There's a very famous mathematician called Kurt Gödel, Hungarian mathematician, who came up with 2 what he called incompleteness theorems way back in 1905. And basically what they're saying is this, that any axiomatic system will contain at least one axiom which can't be proved. When you accept one in faith, you can construct a very consistent interlocking system that has extraordinarily pragmatic, practical applications, but there's one of them that you can't prove. It can be a different one. If you take one on faith, you can prove the others. If you take a different one on faith, you can prove these ones. So there's no system which is not predicated on faith. It's all built on postulates. So our models, whether they're cultural models, whether they're scientific models, whether they're religious models, whether they're political models, whether they're economic models, they're all postulated on some kind of a faith in the system. And once we create our postulates, this determines what our perceptions are going to look like. Because we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. When we grow up in a culture and we grow up in a paradigm, it totally alters our ability to see what is. We don't see what is. We only see what we're capable of seeing because what our culture tells us is real. And so that creates our perceptions, and our perceptions very quickly lead to prejudices of various kinds. And this has been the history of the human race. Religion has started off with its postulates, and on the basis of those postulates, it's created its working models. Now the thing is, when you buy into a set of postulates, then it's a self-referencing system. And so it's right, because it generates only data which are consistent with its worldview, which proves its worldview to be the right worldview. And it doesn't matter what your worldview is, whether it's a fundamentalist Christian worldview or a scientific worldview. You're operating in a self-referencing system whose feedback continues to tell you that you're right. And so this leads to all the problems that we experience. We live in a world then in which we are blinded by the models we've constructed, so that new data, it's impossible for new data to come at us without there being layers and layers of overlay in the process. So it's really difficult for us to find new information, which is why we're so threatened by people who come up with radically new ideas in any field, not just in sociological fields, but in scientific fields and religious fields. In science, there's an adage that says, science evolves one funeral at a time. Old ideas die really closely. It's very true in religion as well. People who threaten us most are people who have brand new ideas. We're not threatened by, we can have leaders who are violent people who oppress us, and although we don't like what they're doing, we'll tolerate them. But if we have leaders who think very differently, who shake our worldview, even if they're very good people, we're really threatened and we get rid of them. We call them the prophets. One of my favorite stories in John's Gospel is in John chapter 6, where Jesus has just fed 5,000 people in the desert. And then he begins to talk to them about God and his relationship to God. He talks about I and the Father are one, more or less. And they get really upset with him and they take up stones. And he says, oh, hold it. I've raised the dead for you. I've given sight to the blind. I fed you, 5,000 of you, with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. I've cured lepers. For which of these are you going to stone me to death? And they say, no, we're not stoning you to death because of, any of these things. We're stoning you because of what you're teaching. We're stoning you because you're teaching that you're the Son of God. And so ideas are much more threatening to us than behavior is threatening. Because new ideas, they rock the basis of our models of reality. Which brings me to my final point. I believe, you believe. At every stage of human history, we have created models of reality and we operate according to them, and we need to outgrow them. There are advantages to them and there are disadvantages to them. So for a long period of time, we operated on a model of reality was based on the notion of revelation, that God spoke to us in particular kinds of books, like the Bible or the Quran or Torah. And so we operated on this. So what we were doing is, we were trying to download wisdom. Unfortunately, we downloaded wisdom through ego, and therefore we fragmented it into mere knowledge. And when you fragment wisdom into knowledge, then you get division. And we killed each other. We created crusades and inquisitions. In its time, it was good. We have outgrown it. It has done a lot of damage and a lot of separation to our world. It's been replaced in some senses by a scientific worldview. And the scientific worldview, for all the advantages it is given to us, it's created its own kinds of problems. The scientific world, allied to a technology and a military mindset, has killed more people in the 20th century than all of the religious wars in history because of our technology. Regimes that didn't believe in God, using technology developed by science without meaning attached to it, have killed more human beings in the 20th century than all religious wars did in the period before that. So for all its goodness, science itself needs to be outgrown in this sense, that scientific thinking is based more or less on the belief system that something is only real if it's sensible. It can be sensed either directly through our sensorium or by extension through our instrumentation. That's the definition of reality that most scientists would agree for as a working hypothesis, that it's only real if it's sensible. Many of them would believe that there's no such thing as the mind, when you're talking particularly about scientism rather than pure science. Scientism believes that the mind is an illusion. It's an epiphenomenon created by biochemical neuronal processes in the brain. That only the brain is real, only physical things are real, and the mind is an illusion created by these biochemical neuronal firings. The belief system that meaning is unimportant. Science has no interest in meaning. It's a very pragmatic thing. It has no interest in meaning. And therefore to talk about the meaning or the importance or the value or the consequences of stuff, that's not the place of science. So we create a technology which could destroy ourselves, but we don't have to think through the consequences. So it's divorced from the search for meaning. Very often this kind of thinking regards the world itself, the earth itself, as merely a resource. It's not a living thing. It has no rights. It's merely resources for human beings. And everything that lives in it, all of the flora and all of the fauna, they're just resources for us. They have no rights on their own. We'll determine what rights they have. And so we can decimate these things and it doesn't matter. And the bottom line is, when you get that wedded to an industry, the bottom line is profit. How much money can we make out of it? So the question is not whether it's good or bad, but whether it makes money for us or it doesn't. So that's the downside of science. I'm not saying science isn't contributing great things. Of course it is, like religion did. But science needs to grow as well. It needs to go way beyond. So where does it need to go? I would postulate it needs to go in the following way. It needs to evolve in the following fashion. Firstly, we need to outgrow the myth of the given. The myth of the given is a philosophical fallacy, which would have us believe that there's an objective reality out there. And if you discover it and I discover it, we'll both be looking at the very same thing. And the truth is, we have no idea what's out there, nor can we ever know what's out there. Indeed, if there is something out there. All we can say is that here's what my sensorium delivers to me, here's what my cognitive processes do to it, and here's the model I come up with to explain what happens inside my cranium. That's the best we can do. But whether there's anything out there corresponding exactly to it, we can't say. Because all we can do, we can only filter it through our sensorium and our cognitive processes. And the fact that the 6.5 billion of us on the planet have basically the same sensorium and the same kind of brain means that we come up with the same results. Doesn't mean it's right or it's true. If we were a different life form with different sensorium and different cognitive processes, we'd have totally different models of what's out there. So we need to go beyond the myth of the given. That there's something definite out there, it's an objective reality. If you get there and I get there, we're in the same place. We create it largely. We create it by our perceptions. It's like, as I said last week, that thinking is an active copulation in which we impregnate the womb of all possibility with the embryos of our own desires. That's what happens. That is the universe that we create out there. So we have to be really careful what we're thinking and what models we're constructing. That's the first one. The second thing is we need to go beyond the myth of the chosen. This is the notion that there's a special religion, or a special language, or a special scriptural tradition, or a special nation that's particularly, or even a special species that's particularly beloved of God. Into the realization that everything that exists is equally an articulation of the divine, and it deserves to be loved. So then we need to go beyond, thirdly, the narrow notion of separate self. This notion that this little particular cluster of consciousness, which I call Sean, that this is separate from that cluster of consciousness back there, which I call Jeannie, that's an illusion. It's an illusion at this level of reality, at the level of physical reality. When the time I get to the causal body, or Atman, or Brahma consciousness, that is not true at all. So I need to start redefining the sense of self. So I can include my neighbour, and include my enemy, and include all human beings, include all sentient life form, wherever they are in the planets, and realize they're all articulations of the divine. Which means then I have to create some kind of a charter to protect the rights of all of these creatures. I have to ensure that they have food, that they have shelter, and that they have safety. And if they're human beings, that they also have access to education and employment and health. And this is where we need to be going, it seems to me, in our world, in our political system, in our scientific models, and in our religious thinkings. We have spent lots of time putting band-aids on the religious models which have been inadequate, and we're now trying to put band-aids on a scientific system which is inadequate. We need to evolve to a place where science and religion can once more coalesce. We come into the era of what I've called in the past mysticists. A mysticist for me being somebody who is a mystic and a scientist and can walk with both feet in the physical reality and in the spiritual reality. Our world is calling for us at this stage to move to the next stage of evolution. This for me is what 2012 is about. It's not about a date when everything's going to change radically. It's a crisis point in which all thinking human beings are being invited to go beyond religion as we've understood it in the past, and to go beyond science as we understand it at the moment, and to create a union of the two which will bring us the mysticists who will invite us into the next stage of our evolution.